Good morning, everyone, and happy Sunday. So, I was doing my own reading, and typically on Sundays, I like to do an extended reading, and also typically they're private, but I just kept getting the sense that this is something that I should really share and really talk about for a couple of reasons. But I think the first reason being is that today Venus goes retrograde. So we begin the 40-day process of Venus moving backward in the sky, initiating a whole bunch of processes reflecting on desires, relationships, and values. And my reading, without any intention of it, reflects this entirely and the numerous different aspects of the reading. So I'm going to start with the astrology oracle in which I got the Sun Venus. And I didn't pick this ahead of time, I promise. I shuffled all 55 cards. What I do is I lay them out one by one and pile them on until they're done, and then I shuffle them together, and then I just pick one randomly from the deck. So total at random, not planned. So the Sun Venus, I mean, look at this. It's this beautiful rose with the sun shining on it. It's the epitome of beauty and vitality. So the regular Venus card, this I did set aside because I was looking. The regular Venus card is this beautiful rose on stained glass. But something about the combination of the Sun Venus brings it to life, gives it vitality, makes it real and tangible rather than just stained glass. So I'd like to read to you the Sun Venus. So every card begins with a quote, and this one is from Emily Dickinson, who has the Sun conjunct Venus in her chart. To love is so startling that it leaves little time for anything else. And yes, truly, if you have ever been in love, you recognize that life starts to fly by for many reasons. Then there's a quote from, not a quote, but kind of like a poetic impulse from the author himself. A world of promise lies beyond the trellis. I suppose yet, say what you will about it, I shall remain a rose. So the Sun-Venus pair. Here is where the principle of creativity, manifestation, and personality, which is the Sun, meets that of pleasure, value, and love, which is Venus. It is the intersection of the archetypes of goodness and beauty, the place where the will to exist as an independent entity is infused with softness, sensuality, and lust, where the interaction between conscious awareness and the senses brings about a desire for aesthetic value and sensory enjoyment. Sun Venus is lust for life, joie de vivre, the sense that beauty is what makes life worth living. Pretty impactful, huh? So here are the gifts that are associated with the Sun-Venus archetypes. The Sun-Venus represents your ability to perceive beauty in the world around you and take pleasure in your sensory experience of life. Venus relates to what Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, called the feeling function, which perhaps counterintuitively is not so much about feeling emotions as it is about the way in which you attribute innate value to things that opposes the logical thinking function. You do not always need to break things down into their parts and pieces and analyze them by category in order to feel their intrinsic value. You just know. Venus judges the value of things not by adding up the parts and pieces, but based on the mysterious surplus that emerges when things come together in harmony. One part of the solar archetype is about perceiving, but another is about creating. In partnership with Venus, this creative impulse, gifted with a softer and more cooperative, it is gifted with a softer and more cooperative disposition. The Sun Venus invites you to relinquish the idea of being in control and instead express your creative gifts in the manner of a gardener, wedded to the soil and all that it grows, involved in a sensorily guided process of co-creation with the earth, cultivating a relationship with the archetype of beauty through harmonious reciprocity. We're going to see this theme pop up in the biblical tarot reading that I did. In and of itself, sunlight is a wonder, yet through the way it nourishes everything that grows upon the earth, its true value, its true potential for beauty is revealed. You are no different. In and of yourself, you are intrinsically valuable, powerful, and beautiful. Yet it is by entering into relationship with the other beings that populate the world around you that you will reach your fruition. It is not by individualistic willpower and the solitary striving of isolated geniuses that the world is beautified and made worth living in, but by people giving of themselves to one another, sharing appreciation for nature and art, and seeking the kind of value that cannot be calculated or ever truly defined. You can't put a price on Sun Venus, and that is precisely how you know it is worth so very much. So, that's the gifts. Here are the challenges associated with the Sun Venus. The challenges with Sun Venus tend to arise when the solar ego misguidedly comes to see love, beauty, and value as things that it can possess. On the collective level, it is abundantly clear that this dynamic has been playing itself out for a very long time. Because solar consciousness, in its less evolved forms, tends to see the world as a field of objects that are there for it to make use of and profit from, art, nature, and the human body are objectified, commodified, and debased, so that they each become easier to buy, sell, and control. But beauty is not a resource to be extracted or exploited. If you hang a painting in a public space, it does not become less beautiful the more people see it, just as a rose in bloom does not run out of perfume. Because obsession with youthful self-image and shallow, unrealistic standards of beauty are so widespread in the culture, it is only natural that you may find it hard to remember your innate divine beauty and value. Indeed, the economy depends upon you forgetting it. You may also hold others to unrealistic standards of physical beauty and struggle to see the elegance of the divine expressing itself through them. There is a relationship between the aesthetic judgments directed inwards and those that point outwards. By finding ways to recognize inner feelings of physical insufficiency and gradually moving towards self-acceptance and self-love, you will find that any tendencies you may have to judge others will melt away quite naturally. Just as a side note, self-love does not necessarily mean what the culture makes it mean, or the common understanding of it culturally or societally at this point. That's something to get into at a different point, but worth mentioning. In romantic relationships, the Sun-Venus calls upon you to practice sovereignty, both claiming it for yourself and allowing your partner to have their own. If there are things about you that you have trouble accepting, or if there are particular traits and capacities you believe yourself to be incapable of, it can be very easy to idealize your romantic partner, seeing them as having the puzzle pieces that you're lacking. No two people have the same strengths and vulnerabilities. It is true, but, practically speaking, this is mostly just projection. I don't even know if I agree with that. Hold on. Everything you seem to lack is present within you. It just needs to be uncovered. Certainly, the people who love you can provide much needed support for your journey of self-discovery, just as you can for them. Sovereignty and self-love is not a replacement for the love and affection of others. It is just a matter of being enough for yourself so you can give and receive without entering into codependent dynamics. So I definitely have a totally different viewpoint on things like codependency, things like self-sovereignty. But again, not the space to get into it, but just letting you know. So finally, there are the invitations, which are kind of like the practical things you can do to embody these archetypal energies. So don't be afraid to honor Venus by relaxing, indulging, and generally enjoying life. Whatever you do to intentionally express these transits, make sure not to force it. You will probably have to do plenty of tiresome things the rest of the time. So take a moment for your own pleasure now and again, and remember, eating cake is a spiritual practice sometimes. You may want to do something creative, and it may be more satisfying at this time to do the kind of thing you are well practiced at, and do it really well. Try to maximize the chances that you can produce something that you will consider beautiful when finished. If you can do any of the above in the company of good friends, all the better. So, the Sun-Venus dynamic takes a little bit of a turn when Venus is retrograde. But the fact that Venus is retrograde, so we know that from our perspective on Earth, a retrograde planet appears to move backward in the sky and appears to move backward in the zodiac. The thing about retrograde motions is that they are all in relationship to the sun. So once a certain planet gets to a certain point beyond the sun, it'll turn retrograde because of where it is in its orbit. For Venus, Venus doesn't move beyond, I think it's 48 degrees beyond the sun. So once it gets to that 48-degree point, if you're looking at a chart, you can see that's when it'll start to go retrograde. And then it'll retrograde backward. And again, 48 degrees is the key number there. So Venus is never more than like 2 signs away from the sun. That being said, the relationship aspect between the sun and Venus, and the emphasis on relationships during Venus retrogrades, this is truly the time, not necessarily for self-love, but to see what value you can contribute to a relationship. A relationship, if it's going to be true, like the Sun-Venus desires it to be, is a certain level of sacrificing the self for the sake of something greater. To have this kind of mutual reciprocity, reciprocation, however you want to say it, toward a greater good or a higher ideal. This is shining the light on Venus's desire for absolute beauty and absolute ideals. So the only way to do that is through mutual reception. To be able to have 2 people to agree to both better themselves for the sake of a higher unifying relationship. That's kind of the idea behind that. Just one of the many parts of Sun-Venus. But I want to get into the biblical tarot because we're already 13 minutes in. And I'm not going to read from the book for each card because then we'll be here for like an hour. And I don't want that to be that long. But I do want to share the reading that I have and just kind of briefly talk about its connections to the Venus retrograde and how it might be applicable. So I did a specific spread, and that I don't think is going to be necessarily relevant because that's more personal, but I will just go through the cards. So the first card that I pulled, the position in the spread is where you are at in your journey now. Maybe this can apply to you too. So you know what? I will tell you the descriptions of the placements themselves. So the first card is where you're at currently in your journey. And the card that I pulled is the 2 of Chalices. This is the card of bond and relationships, and especially covenant. So this depicts David and Jonathan, who have a kind of inseparable bond, who, despite King Saul, who is the father of Jonathan, despite King Saul's enmity toward David and jealousy, that does not change the way that Jonathan feels about David and they continue their friendship. The idea is a reciprocal, mutual appreciation for the same kind of values. And in this case, this bond is, it's called a covenant, which basically means it's more than just an agreement to be friends. A covenant has conditions. A condition to be unconditional, even, to always be there for that person. Right, so when we make a covenant with someone, we are agreeing to something that is bound to be boundless. And what that means is that we give of ourselves, and the part that we give, we cannot take back. It's the same kind of covenant that establishes the vows in marriage. Now, this can represent all bonds, both relationships, friendships, even the more superficial bonds like our career or boss or coworkers. But the essence behind it is mutual reciprocity, both giving for a higher good. So that's where the current journey is. The next card is the attitudes, the ideas, and beliefs that must be let go of to move forward on this journey. That is the 9 of Feathers, which is the equivalent to the 9 of Swords. So the 9 of Feathers deals with guilt, the burden of guilt, remorse, and it actually exemplifies the guilt that Peter feels after denying Jesus 3 times. So right before Jesus' crucifixion, he tells Peter that you will deny me 3 times. And Peter scoffs at Jesus. He says, no, how could I ever do that? Well, when Jesus is taken away and Peter follows him, he's confronted 3 different times by people asking if he was one of the disciples of Jesus. And each time he says no. And by the 3rd time he says no, he hears the crow of the rooster. And he realizes, wow, he was right. I have disowned him 3 times. And that leaves Peter feeling guilty, remorseful. It gives him a huge burden of guilt, which is likely why he becomes one of the most proactive writers for the New Testament afterward. But the idea is to let go of remorse and guilt and shame, but only through actual reconciliation, which is another perfect word for Venus retrograde and also the 2 of Chalices, because reconciliation requires relationship. It requires you to amend your mistakes and to also amend those mistakes within yourself and with other people. So there is a relationship aspect to it. And one of the primary directives of Venus retrograde is mending relationships. How have my current actions, thoughts, behaviors, and beliefs affected both my relationship to myself and my relationship to other people, and especially my partner, my family? This is your cue to distance yourself from your mistakes, but to learn from them. To say that here's how I can be a better partner. Here's how I can do better in my relationship. Here's what I can give. Here's what I wasn't willing to give before, but now I have the selflessness and understanding that there's something beyond me in this relationship. What can I give to improve the situation? Because not only will that sacrifice improve your personal life, it'll improve your relationship, which also then loops back into your personal life. When you strive for the higher good, only the higher good comes. That's the idea anyway. That's the ideal. That's hopefully what you can achieve by recognizing what you can give up and then embracing what comes from giving that up. But especially if things have been feeling heavy, and I'm sure they have, especially with the Mars retrograde recently, and now Mars coming out of retrograde and things moving forward again, especially in the sign of Cancer, which is very much related to home and family life, but also relationships. Now we can take those burdens, we can address them, and we can move forward in a new way. So, time to leave behind that remorse and guilt by addressing it. That's the message behind the Nine of Feathers. So, the path going forward, or new attitudes, influences, and opportunities to adopt and bring into your life. And what we have is the star, which is, again, perfect symbolism. So we have the three wise men, the Magi, traveling to find Jesus, who was just born in the manger. Now, the star in that story is the North Star, but it's not lost the fact that Venus is the morning star and the evening star, and is one of the brightest objects in the sky, other than the North Star. So we have the idea of being able to move forward in hope, in faith, with divine guidance. But we have to also trust. So the challenges behind the star is establishing the faith, or having a lack of faith, or being misguided. So we have to address whatever is in us that seems to be misleading us or misguiding us. And how do we know what's misleading us and misguiding us? Where do we feel guilt? Where do we feel shame? What makes us feel remorseful? And if we're doing something that should make us feel remorseful, to maybe allow those feelings to come in. Another aspect behind what we've gone over so far is actually allowing yourself to feel certain things. That's the Sun Venus as well. Some of the danger is that you can repress those feelings and just try to focus on the positive outcomes. But you can't get the positive outcomes if you're repressing the feelings. So the star is indicating a dedication. Again, we use the word covenant, to faith. And that faith can be within the context of your relationship. It can be the context of your spiritual life. Obviously, the biblical tarot, it's pretty obvious what that faith is supposed to be. But just applying it archetypally, generally, it's establishing faith in mutual reciprocity, the ability to solve problems with another person rather than shy away from them, the ability to change and transform yourself and your own inconsistencies, your own shortcomings into an opportunity to bond, to create a new bond. So this is saying the path going forward, the attitude to adopt: be hopeful, be optimistic, be joyous, because there's a lot that optimism can bring, especially when you're doing the work to unburden yourself. Oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that word, because now I'm just seeing Kamala Harris in my head. Sorry. Anyway, to relieve that sense of shame, guilt, and remorse through faithful action. That's the goal as far as moving forward, or the things to accept into your life. Now, there are two more cards. The next are the challenges that could potentially come up as you travel on this path. And what we have is the Four of Candles, or the equivalent to the Four of Wands, which is the ark being brought to Jerusalem. So the idea here, so the Four of Wands, or the Four of Candles, is generally an optimistic or an upbeat card, because it represents the kind of stability that comes from mutual communal harmony and the ability to have established a certain foundation that now protects you. It gives a reason for celebration. So why is this a challenge? Well, we have to look at the negative sides of the Four of Candles, which represents a kind of neglect of the structures or of the foundations that bring you joy. So it's very, very easy to neglect the body that you're in, to neglect the home that you're in, to neglect the relationship that you're in, and to neglect the family that you're in. It's very easy, because these are the common things. We wake up in our bodies every day. We wake up in our house or apartment every day. And every time that we choose to not embrace that wholly, we allow neglect to build and rise up within us. This can result in not taking care of your body, not taking care of your house, not communicating properly in your relationships, not addressing problems that need to be addressed, isolation from your family. So it's especially relevant that this is the Four of Candles, because the number four represents stability, but in astrology, the fourth house is Cancer, which represents your home and family. So this has a lot of indication to where the location of these challenges are, which is within your home. And it's the home that's your body, because your body is the vessel for your soul. That's the home. Home within a relationship. So the relationship has a home between you and your partner. It can't exist outside of that, right? Well, okay, maybe you can disagree with that. That's fine. But then your actual home too. You know, did we do our chores today? Are we taking care of the things that we need to take care of? Like, are there any leaks in the house? Or is there a cabinet that's loose? Or whatever. It seems like simple or mundane stuff, but the fact is, to be grateful means to address all of the issues that you can possibly address, or to at least continually strive to address them, rather than put them off, rather than not deal with them. So the challenges presented by the Four of Candles, therefore, is the ability to remain grateful despite the presence of the things that give you joy. Sounds like Venus, right? So Venus can either be this really passionate desire and beauty and value, but the neglected side of Venus feels jealous, envious, lustful, and filled with this kind of heavy energy. So the challenge is to look at where we might be neglecting our gratitude and how we can address it. So the last card, the fifth card, is how to move forward, or essentially it's the potential outcome if you continue on this journey. So the journey being establishing a better relationship within yourself and with the people you're in relationship with. If that's the decision that you decide, sorry, I'm repeating myself, if that's what you decide to do, to have better relationships, like the Venus retrograde gives you the opportunity for, well, then the path forward is very strong and determined. We have the Chariot, which depicts Pharaoh, Pharaoh's pursuit, which I thought when I first pulled was a little ironic, or maybe not ironic, because Pharaoh's pursuit ends up in his death, being drowned in the Red Sea. But the idea is that there's a certain willpower and fierceness and drive that comes with Pharaoh's pursuit and what he believes his ideal, what he believes is the right thing for him to do. So, this is the drive and the determination to move forward with the things that are difficult. So this is the energy to overcome obstacles. This is the energy to take some control within yourself and to see where your willpower and your drive can carry you. This does come with a very fine edge between the challenges and the opportunities, because the challenges, you're still moving forward. You're not inert, because the Chariot is all about motion. So the challenges represent obstacles. The fear of trying to address obstacles, and that ties back into the Nine of Feathers as well, fear. It's recklessness, and it's a lack of control, or trying to exert too much control because of aggression. So the idea behind the Chariot, you have the two horses, right? Well, if both horses are going in the direction that you're trying to go, you move forward. But if one horse decides that it wants to veer off, then you have total chaos, because then your chariot goes all over the place and could potentially flip. And what you might do to correct those horses could be overly aggressive, right? You're trying to get them back in line, but if you're not doing it in a harmonious way, if you're not doing it with gratitude and respect, those horses are just going to kick right back at you and toss you off the chariot. So the idea is that if things are going a certain direction in your life and you feel that you have no control over it right now, the way to come back into that control is not through force or aggression, but rather harmony, striving toward more harmonious values. That is bringing the Sun Venus back into the situation. So the potential to go forward is great. You have this drive, you have this energy, you have this motivation. Mars isn't retrograde anymore. And obviously, we have the Mercury retrograde coming up as well. So, as far as forward motion and movement, there's going to be some pause for reflection. So, the idea here then is to use that drive and energy to reflect on your relationships and how you can improve them and what you can implement over the next 40 days or so. So, that is pretty much the main message of the reading here. I was so surprised that because I did the biblical tarot first, and then I decided to pull the astrological oracle. And to see the correlations like this is really astounding. Every time that I see something like this, I'm just like, wow, it's really tapping into the archetypal energy that's happening right now. Venus goes retrograde today. What are the odds that I would get Sun Venus and the cards that I did that talk about relationships, that talk about reconciliation, that talk about bonds, that talk about overcoming guilt and striving for hope, all of these things that are associated with Venus. Truly mind-boggling. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. And if you stuck around this long, I commend you because I think I'm hard to listen to sometimes. So thank you so much. I hope that this brought some light to you in some way, that this gives you a kind of understanding of like, okay, maybe there's something I can do to have better relationships, even if it's just a better relationship with myself at this point. And maybe I can talk about self-love and things like that in a different video, because I think there are some crucial perspectives to self-love that are totally overlooked nowadays. But maybe that's one of the things that we can all think about together too. What does self-love actually mean? And what's the difference between like narcissistic self-love and a self-love that serves a higher purpose? That is the question I'll leave you with this. So I'm not. I don't. I'm not good at ending videos. I don't know what to do. So I'm just gonna say thank you for watching, and until next time.